We walked a very long distance, one in front of the other. Wanwei couldn't help herself and ran after me. "Miss Yi." I paused and looked up at her sad eyes. "I'm sorry, I know I can't deny the harm I caused you, but please believe me, that night 7 years ago was really just an accident. I don't have any thoughts about Mr. Gu and the Gu family. Miss Yi, please help me persuade Mrs. Gu to return Wan Ning to me, please." Wanwei grabbed my sleeves, looking shaky. It seemed that as long as I refused, she would kneel down immediately. I helped her up, but I didn't know how to start. How should I tell her that it won't take long for Gu Huaichuan to fall in love with you? He will love you more than when he loved me the most. Including that seemingly unkind and arrogant Mrs. Gu, she will also love you very much. In the future, your family of 3 will be very happy. And I am just a female supporting role who was swept away by jealousy and had a miserable ending. I'm sorry, I may not be able to help you. As you can see, Mrs. Gu doesn't like me, so she won't listen to me. As for Wan Ning, you can rest assured. Although Mrs. Gu is a little cold, she is the child's grandmother after all. She will be very good to Wan Ning. When Gu Huaichuan thinks it through in a while, you can meet. Really? Wanwei hesitated to let go of me, but her voice was still trembling. I patted her shoulder and comforted her. "Well, no one will separate you. You are destined." Wanwei's expression relaxed a little. She bowed and said several more apologies in a row, then turned and hurriedly left in the direction of Gu's house. The closer she is to the Gu family, the farther I am from Gu Huaichuan. That's good. Maybe without my obstruction, they will be together faster. There is no need for me to use so-called vicious means to promote the plot, because the male and female protagonists have a natural attraction to each other. After so many years of debut, I took a lot of bad scripts in the early days to accumulate popularity. However, I didn't expect that my real life is 100 times worse than what I played in the play. But even the most dedicated actresses occasionally have the urge to tear up the script. No one stipulates that I must follow those ridiculous plots. At least, I still have a career that I have worked hard to protect. Compared with being Mrs. Gu, who is envied by everyone and loses her surname from then on, I am more attracted to the life of a free and easy heroine. After returning, I blocked all social accounts of Gu Huaichuan. If I can't afford to offend him, I can always hide. But I forgot that if I don't look for him, he will come to me. At that time, in order to get out of it as soon as possible, I began to take jobs crazily. So, when a call came in claiming to discuss business, I didn't doubt it at all. Until the familiar breathing sound came from the other end. I couldn't help but feel a sore nose, and could only try to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Gu, please be decent. Don't do these meaningless things." There was silence for a long time on the other side, only the sound of rain. I subconsciously looked outside, and then I noticed that it was already raining heavily outside the window. I held my phone tightly and walked towards the balcony step by step. The thick rain curtain wrapped around the dark night, like a monster with a huge mouth, waiting to devour people in the darkness at any time. Although it was blurry, my intuition told me that Gu Huaichuan was standing there. I suddenly felt tired, but I couldn't let him continue to get wet in the rain. After all, we are still a loving and sweet couple to the outside world, and it would be troublesome if we were photographed by paparazzi squatting at night. After several entanglements, I took an umbrella from the cabinet and hurried downstairs. Sure enough, as soon as I walked out of the unit door, I saw Gu Huaichuan, who was in a mess in the heavy rain. I walked over and handed him the umbrella. "Go back, you are already a father, you shouldn't be here in the rain for another woman." Gu Huaichuan seemed not to hear him, and spoke to himself. "Yi Lanin, you don't want me anymore, right?" I was stunned and asked him, "Why? Can you sever your relationship with Wan Ning? Or do you plan to pretend that nothing happened 7 years ago? Or, have you found evidence to prove that the person that night was not you?" Of course he couldn't find it, because just a few days ago, Gu's mother called me to tell me the results of the paternity test. Wan Ning is indeed his child. Gu Huaichuan shook his head blankly, with drops of water sliding down his cheeks. He couldn't tell whether it was rain or tears. No, I asked a lot of people, and they all said they saw me and Wanwei together that night. But I really didn't. I don't know what happened. I was indeed angry that you broke the appointment that night, but I haven't done anything to let you down. Gu Huichuan's eyes turned red, and his voice couldn't stop choking. I didn't touch Wanwei, really. Yining, believe me, just this once, please. He reached out to hug me, but I took a step back to avoid him. I don't understand why he is still unwilling to admit it until now. Gu Huichuan, you clearly betrayed me, didn't you? No matter how many times he says he loves me, no matter how much he regrets, from now on, there is no possibility for us. Yilanin, aren't you sad at all? Is it that easy for you to give up on me? It's 10 years, not 10 months, not 10 days, it's our 10 years. We're getting married next month, and I'm going to marry you soon. Why is this happening? I've been angry with you, resented you, and even hated you, but Yilanin, in these 10 years, there hasn't been a second where I didn't love you. Gu Huichuan collapsed and knelt in the rain. Every word was extremely painful. He was like a madman, murmuring over and over again, no. No. Yilanin, I've never loved anyone except you. I can't describe how I felt at that moment. I just felt like something in my chest had cracked. Boundless emotions surged up, pressing me so hard that I could hardly breathe. I dragged the half-crazy Gu Huichuan upstairs, and when I touched him, I found that his forehead was very hot. He became drowsy and couldn't even say a complete sentence. I hurriedly applied ice packs to cool him down, and then found clean clothes for him to change into. But when I touched the thin callus on his fingertips, the emotional tower that I had accumulated for many days finally collapsed completely. From the time I saw those barrages until today, I didn't even shed tears. I found a million reasons for myself. Be decent, be able to lose, and maintain the last dignity. People can't change what is destined. It's just a failure in love. It's no big deal. I can accept Gu Huichuan's betrayal of me, and I can accept the fact that he has a child with another woman. But the only thing I can't face is that when I am ready to give up on him completely. He ran to me desperately and said that he still loved me. How could I not be sad? I pressed my palm against his palm and cried loudly. No one knows better than me how much Gu Huichuan loved me. In order to be with me, he disobeyed his mother again and again. Even, he almost broke off relations with his family. At that time, we had just been together for a short time. When Gu's mother found out, she was extremely opposed. She looked down on me with an ordinary family background and believed that women in the entertainment industry were not pure in mind. So, she gave me a check for 10 million and asked me to leave Gu Huichuan. I refused, and because of this, the mother and son had a very bad relationship. Later, Gu Huichuan was so angry that he directly cut off contact with his family, and thus lost all the privileges of being the young master of the Gu family. Except for me, he had nothing at that time. That year, I was a sophomore, and Gu Huichuan had just graduated. For the first time in his life, the pampered young master experienced the hardships of ordinary people's lives. Even though he came from a prestigious school and had an incredibly beautiful resume, Gu Huichuan had not found a job for 2 months due to the obstruction of Gu's mother. She tried to use poverty to force Gu Huichuan away. She wanted to tell us that love cannot face all difficulties, and if there is no money, nothing can be done. With me, Gu Huichuan is just an ordinary person who can't even find a job. But even so, he still didn't give up on me. It's not necessary to do those amazing jobs to support you. Yining, even without the halo of the Gu family, I can let you live a good life, I promise. When saying this, Gu Huichuan's eyes flashed with tiny lights. I was filled with guilt, always thinking that I had harmed him. Promise me that no matter what you do, you must do what you like. I was afraid that he would regret it, that he would be unbalanced, and that he would blame me one day. However, I underestimated Gu Huichuan's determination to be with me. He lowered himself and did all the jobs that were willing to let him do. Construction sites, takeout, waiter. He did whatever made money. Just like that, 3 months later, on my birthday, he gave me a necklace. He never told me how hard he had been working these days, whether he had been wronged, or whether he had been made difficult by others. He only said, "Eneen, look, I can make money." The 10 million was not enough to shake me, and Gu's mother's various means of coercion and inducement could not make me back off. Until I saw Gu Huichuan's hands that used to play the piano become scarred. I realized how ridiculous I was. He kept saying that he wanted him to do what he liked, but to be with me, he had to give up too much. He could no longer play the piano, collect his favorite watches, or fly abroad to see art exhibitions at any time. He could only be with me, becoming an ordinary person crushed by life. That's why I ignored him countless times later, stood him up on the anniversary, and left him alone on his birthday. Because I want to succeed. I want Mother Gu to give me 10 million yuan so that I can throw back 20 million yuan to her. I want Gu Huichuan to return to his previous life, and I want him to be happy. But accidents often knock on the door before happiness. Not long after my birthday, Gu Huichuan had a car accident. That night, he went out to deliver food in the heavy rain and ran a red light for an order that was about to expire. When I received the call, he was in the hospital for emergency treatment. Mrs. Gu, who was always noble and elegant, cursed at me at the door of the emergency room. "Yi Lanin, to what extent do you want to harm him? Is it love to let him accompany you to suffer and do those menial jobs?" I shook my head woodenly. I only know that if Gu Huichuan can't survive, then I will definitely not survive. Fortunately, with the best medical resources, Gu Huichuan is out of danger. He lay in the ICU for a month before waking up. The first sentence he said when he woke up was, "I want to marry Yi Lanin." After this incident, Gu's mother was scared to death and finally gave in and agreed to let us be together. The price was that Gu Huichuan injured his brain. After the car accident, he had memory problems and often forgot what he had done. So I can probably understand why he said he had never touched Ruan Wei. It's not that he didn't do it, but he didn't remember it. At that time, I probably would never have thought that this would be the ending between us. Who should I blame? Blame the plot for being too bloody, or is it that we are not destined to be together after all, and can only go this far? Or maybe people's true feelings change rapidly. He could have died for me, but it didn't affect him falling in love with another woman later. Fortunately, I was able to withdraw in time so that the ending would not be as miserable as the barrage said. I looked at Gu Huichuan quietly, my eyes were sore that I couldn't open them. I think this should be our last night. From tomorrow on, we are two parallel lines that will never intersect, and we will have nothing to do with each other. The next day, Gu Huichuan, who had woken up, was much calmer. He sat on the bedside with his eyes downcast, not moving or speaking. Seeing this, I didn't want to get too entangled with him, and I didn't want to recall the words he said when he was crazy last night. "Go if you're okay, don't come to me again, and it's useless even if you come." I've been exposed to foreign movies recently. If everything goes well, I may not come back in the future. Gu Huichuan still didn't react. After a long time, he slowly raised his head and whispered, "I know you won't believe me again. Since the car accident, I don't remember many things clearly, including that ridiculous night 7 years ago. Although I can't remember what happened that night, the only thing I can be sure of is that I didn't touch Ruan Wei, because that night, someone called your name in my ear." I was stunned for 2 seconds, and I didn't understand what Gu Huichuan meant. He didn't explain, and silently got up and left. Forget it, the ending is the same anyway, there is nothing to entangle. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, as if it were a lifetime ago. Gu Huichuan, goodbye. Never see you again. 3 days later, I asked my agent, Sister Tang, to help me prepare for joining the crew, the sooner the better. But she laughed at me on the other end of the phone. "Do you have to be so stubborn? You're about to get married, but you're still thinking about filming every day. Will your young master Gu let you go?" I was so embarrassed that I could only make up a random excuse. A hasty announcement of the cancellation of the engagement would definitely trigger a lot of speculation, and the spearhead would most likely be directed at me. Before I figured out the ending, I had to drag it out for now. After dealing with Sister Tang, I began to think about how to handle this matter to minimize the damage. If I tell the truth, I can not only exit as a perfect victim, but also sell a wave of misery. But at the same time, Wan Wei and her son will definitely suffer from overwhelming online violence. This is not my intention. I was holding my phone and having a headache, and the screen suddenly lit up. Wan Wei sent me a message and asked me to meet at a coffee shop near Gu's house tomorrow afternoon. I was a little surprised, because I had made my words clear enough that day. But she was sincere and repeatedly asked me to keep the appointment. I didn't think too much about it, and I went to the coffee shop at the time she said the next afternoon. However, the person sitting at the seat was Wan Ning. "Pretty auntie, we meet again." I was stunned and looked around. "Why is it you? Where is your mother?" Hearing this, Wan Ning's pink cheeks showed a sly smile. "No need to look for it, the person who asked pretty auntie out is me." I was even more confused, thinking that this child would not come to warn me to stay away from his dear parents, otherwise I would be dead. I remember that the barrage seemed to say that this child was a genius child. Seeing that I was stunned, Wan Ning's smile deepened a little, and her big eyes like water grapes looked at me steadily. "Auntie, you can also see those barrages, right?" In an instant, I was struck by lightning, and I was so shocked that I almost forgot how to breathe. I stared wide-eyed, and a basket of words stuck in my throat for a long time and couldn't spit them out. Don't be surprised. You're not the first person who can see the comments, and you won't be the only one. Wan Ning was surprisingly calm, and her demeanor was nothing like that of a 7-year-old. At that moment, countless possibilities flashed through my mind. Time travel? System? Rebirth? I was confused. Originally, I only had one question, but now there are so many questions that I don't know where to start. Wan Ning can also see the comments, so what about Wan Wei? How much does he know about the plot? And why did he come to me in the name of Wan Wei? Auntie, are you curious about how I know you can see the barrage? Wan Ning pointed out my confusion and continued, "It's actually very simple. Auntie, your reaction that day was too calm, as if you had expected it. The most important thing is that you said the exact opposite of what was said in the barrage." I took a breath and couldn't help asking him, "Did your mother ask you to come to me today? What do you want to do?" Wan Ning shook his head. "No, my mother doesn't know anything. I hope Auntie can give me some time to finish what I want to say next." After that, Wan Ning picked up the small school bag next to the seat and pulled out a thick notebook from it. "About 2 years ago, I could see some barrages floating in the air one after another. At first, I didn't know what they were. Later I found out that it was our fate, like a set program, and the last step had already been written. To be honest, I was not happy at all when I saw the ending. Mom has suffered a lot for me over the years. There may be only a few strokes in the plot, but it was a real 7 years for us, 7 years of suffering and hard to let go. So since I can remember, the person I have always hoped to find has never been my father. But the criminal." My hand holding the spoon trembled, and I looked up and met Wan Ning's cold eyes, which were chilling to the bone. Wan Ning, I lowered my head and stirred the coffee from time to time, and my voice became less and less confident. "No wonder you stopped us in public that day." "Yes, but I don't want to retaliate against you, because Mr. Gu is not my father at all. Of course, it's not the criminal either." It was like being poured a glass of ice water from head to toe, and then immediately thrown into the stove. After repeating it several times, I didn't even have the ability to think at all. I opened my mouth with difficulty, but I couldn't put together a complete word. Wan Ning raised her eyebrows and looked very calm. "Auntie, are you talking about the paternity test? I now suspect that this child can not only see the barrage, but also read minds." Wan Ning handed me a few sheets of paper while speaking. "Generally speaking, if the paternity test is only done once and happens to be urgent, there is a high probability of error." I calmed my pounding heart and repeatedly checked every word on the paper. The results showed that Wan Ning and Gu Huichuan were indeed not father and son. I went to different institutions and did many tests, and the results will not be wrong. Wan Ning curled the corners of his lips, looking very calm. But I still couldn't believe what I saw. How could it be possible? Gu Huichuan was clearly with your mother that night 7 years ago. There are even photos, and your mother didn't deny it at the time. Wan Ning didn't say anything, and began to flip through the thick notebook at hand. So I'm wondering, is there a possibility that in order to force the plot forward, a person who doesn't exist in the barrage appeared? Over the years, I wrote down all the barrages I saw, trying to find some clues from them. As a result, I found that many of the things mentioned in the barrages didn't happen at all, especially about Uncle Gu and Mom. They should have met earlier, but the fact is that they haven't even met in the past few years. In other words, the plot had already changed long before I saw the barrage. If I'm not mistaken, that night 7 years ago was the key point to advance the plot, but Uncle Gu obviously didn't do that. He was the first to violate the plot, which led to us all seeing the barrage. Non-existent person? If what Wan Ning said is true, does it mean that Gu Huichuan didn't lie to me?